You don't know what you're getting yourself into. This whole thing is clearly a misunderstanding, and I refuse to be blamed for it.
When the HOA president locked the gate to Anthony Ridley's ranch, everyone thought he'd back down. They didn't know Anthony. This wasn't his first storm. He'd seen fences fall before, but this one wasn't made of wood or wire. It was built from arrogance, greed, and a padlock he didn't own. At sunrise in early March, the gate that was meant to cage him became the spark that unleashed his quiet war. What happened next would turn the HOA's golden rules into their own trap and make one man the most dangerous kind of neighbor, the one who fights back with the law on his side. He built a file like a case officer, date-stamped photos of the fence line, drone footage of the gate location, certified copies of his deed. The title packet he'd skimmed at closing, he read it like scripture now. 2 paragraphs jumped off the page. A 20-foot agricultural access easement recorded in 1989 and stock water rights tied to the creek long before Lakeside Meadows built its first mailbox. He called the County Road and Bridge office, then the tax assessor, then a surveyor who still carried real steel tape. Their map overlays told a nasty little truth. The HOA's new fence wasn't just ugly, it clipped 5 feet into a county right-of-way and straddled the recorded easement like it didn't exist. "They can't do that," the surveyor muttered, tapping a finger on the plat. "But they did," Anthony said, and slid the pen for a certification stamp. Day 3, he walked into the sheriff's office with a rancher's hat and a binder a lawyer would envy: animal welfare officer, fire marshal, road supervisor. 4 signatures later, he had an emergency order for unobstructed egress for livestock and emergency services. The deputy cut the lock while Marjorie filmed on her phone and promised lawyers. The gate swung open like a held breath. The cows found water. Common sense should have followed. It didn't. Fines doubled overnight. "Temporary compliance," the notice sneered. "Gate to be relocked if fencing not corrected." Anthony didn't argue. He replaced the deputy's cut shackle with his lock, latched the order to the chain in a plastic sleeve, and tipped his hat. "See you at the meeting." That wasn't bravado, it was scheduling. He kept digging. Lakeside Meadows didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew from a bankrupt developer's carcass 15 years back. Somewhere in that paperwork, odd little parcels had been carved out for drainage, signs, and ingress-egress strips. One of those slivers, 30 feet wide, a quarter-mile long, ran along Anthony's fence and under that shiny gate. It didn't belong to the HOA. It didn't belong to Anthony either. It belonged to a dormant LLC 2 counties over that forgot to pay its $200 franchise fee. The registered agent answered on the 4th call. "You want the strip? Take the back taxes and attorney fees and it's yours." 3 notarized papers and $12,614 later, a new deed recorded to Ridley Pastures LLC. Translation: Anthony didn't just have an easement now, he owned the dirt the HOA thought they controlled. He didn't strut, he prepared. Glenn helped him haul in a cattle guard and 2 swing-away ranch gates. The electric co-op sent a crew after Anthony flagged the fence across their utility easement. Linemen don't debate bylaws, they carry bolt cutters and authority. The fire chief wrote a blistering memo about obstructed emergency access to pasture structures and creek draws that double as wildland fire breaks. Anthony stacked copies of everything: deed to the strip, easement plats, co-op letter, fire memo, sheriff's order. He printed 40 packets and put them in a box labeled receipts. If you've ever walked into a room knowing you're holding the truth, you know the calm that rode with him to that clubhouse. The meeting smelled like coffee and fear. Marjorie opened with her usual sermon on aesthetic cohesion, then rolled right into continuing non-compliance at Parcel 17B, eyes lasered on Anthony. He let her finish, then carried his box to the table and began handing out packets row by row. "Before we discuss my non-compliance, a quick correction. The fence and gate you installed are on land I now own." He pointed to page 1, a fresh county deed stamped an hour earlier. Murmurs. He tapped page 2, the 1,989 easement, gasps. He slid forward the fire chief's letter and the co-op notice, like the river cards in poker. You obstructed an emergency route and a utility corridor. You also landlocked livestock. That's not just rude. In Texas, it's criminal. Glenn coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. Marjorie's smile didn't crack. Her eyes did. She tried the usual gambit, blame the vendor, stall with legal review, threaten more fines. Anthony didn't take the bait. You're free to review, he said evenly. Meanwhile, remove your fence from my strip by Friday at 5 p.m. If it's still there at 5/1, I'll hire a dozer and send the bill to the recorded owner at time of trespass, which, per this map, is the HOA. A board member whispered to another, the kind of whisper that sounds like a resignation letter writing itself. A hand shot up in the third row, a mom who'd been fined for a trampoline. Is this why the ambulance couldn't get to Mrs. Hanley last week without backing down the lane? The room turned human. Control started to leak out of Marjorie's fingers like sand. But Anthony wasn't done. Quietly, in the same week he bought the strip, he'd caught another scent. The HOA's clubhouse and common area sat under a line of credit with Lakeside National. Assessments were down, legal bills were up, past due interest had eaten the cushion. Lakeside National had a habit of selling distressed notes for cheap if the buyer could close fast and behave like a gentleman. He called Samuel the same bank VP who financed his cattle that afternoon. By Thursday, Ridley Pastures LLC held the note on the HOA's clubhouse and greenbelt improvements. Not the deed, the debt. Hold someone's debt, you hold their attention. He didn't swing it like a bat. He carried it like a clipboard to the next meeting and slid the assignment across the table. Consider this leverage, he said, to fix this right. Marjorie's playbook hadn't planned for a rancher fluent in paper. She called him a bully. He called a vote. Not to dissolve the HOA, he wasn't out to salt the earth, but to adopt 3 simple reforms. Ranch-style agricultural fencing as an approved standard, a permanent Knox-box emergency access on all perimeter gates, and an independent audit of enforcement actions for the past 5 years, with refunds where selective fines had been used as a weapon. Approve these tonight, he added, and I'll cut the interest on your clubhouse note to 2% and give you 12 months interest only while you sort your mess. Vote no, and I keep the current rate and begin remedies per the loan. You could hear the math hit the room. Even the board's lawyer started blinking like he'd just woken up. People who'd whispered outside started speaking at microphones. A welder fined for a work trailer. A widow dinged for a flagpole angle. A family told to paint their barn beige. When the vote came, it wasn't close. The reforms passed in a landslide. A motion to remove Marjorie for cause followed like thunder after lightning. She tried to gavel the motion out of order. The attorney cleared his throat. It's in order. The board secretary, hand shaking, but voice steady, called the roll. Aye, 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 aye. The room didn't cheer. It exhaled. Power didn't vanish. It moved back to where it always should have lived, with the people who mow the grass and fix the pipes and pay the notes. By Friday at 4:50, a crew was unbolting the HOA fence from Anthony's strip. He brought lemonade. No one talked much. At 5:10, the last post pulled, he set the cattle guard flush, hung his swing gates, and mounted a shiny red Knox box so fire, EMS, and law could roll through without a single phone call. He left the sign small and polite. Ridley Pastures Road, private easement. Emergency access welcome. That weekend, he hosted a cookout on the creek bank. Kids fished. Neighbors who'd been afraid to wave dropped folding chairs in the shade. A volunteer firefighter pointed at the new gate. That right there, that's how grown-ups run a community. The cleanup after the storm wasn't dramatic. It was better. The audit mailed refund checks to people who thought they'd never see justice. The new board swapped threat letters for service calendars. Brush clearing days, culvert cleanouts, a fence building Saturday where Anthony taught a banker how to stretch wire without swearing. The co-op got their corridor back. The county signed off on the access as compliant. And Anthony? He swapped the binder for a smaller folder labeled Keep. Inside, his deed, the easement map, a letter offering to release the clubhouse note at cost if the board kept the reforms for 5 years without backsliding. He didn't need to own anyone. He needed them to remember who owns what and why. If you're staring at your own padlock, hear this. You don't beat a bully by yelling louder. You beat them by reading the plat, calling the road office, finding the easement, and learning who actually owns the dirt under the argument. Document everything. Film politely. Talk to the folks in hard hats before you hire a lawyer in a hard suit. And when you get your gate open, don't turn into the thing you fought. Write rules a human can live under. Put a Knox box on your pride. Because the best revenge isn't a headline or a courtroom selfie, it's a neighborhood that stops being afraid when one person decides to stand on the law and not around it. Now it's your turn. What's your lock? A bogus fine? A phantom rule? A gate someone swears you can't touch? Drop the story in the comments and where you're watching from. I'll pin the best receipt threads so other folks can borrow your playbook. And if this helped, share it with the one neighbor who thinks they're alone. They're not. Somewhere in your closing packet is the sentence that sets you free. Go find it. Then swing that gate and let the pasture breathe. Anthony's mailbox didn't just look full, it looked weaponized. Every morning, a new white envelope with HOA compliance office screamed from the stack like a courtroom summons. Fines started at $50 a day, then doubled, dressed up in phrases that sounded important and meant nothing. Visual inconsistency detrimental to community appeal. He read it out loud in his kitchen and laughed the kind of laugh that keeps you from throwing a chair. Visual inconsistency? I'm raising cattle, not hosting weddings. Glenn, steady as ever across the table, sipped his coffee and said what Anthony already knew. They're not enforcing rules, they're testing endurance. Either you fold or you bleed. So Anthony made a choice that scares bullies more than yelling. He decided to listen. He walked into the next HOA meeting without drama, just a notepad and eyes open, hunting for the weak joint in the armor. The clubhouse ran like a cold office with better lighting, a packed room, thin smiles, a microphone that turned normal voices into threats. A woman named Paula Green stood up furious about a tree they forced her to cut. She glanced at Anthony, then looked away like he was radioactive. When new business came, Marjorie flipped through infractions the way dealers flip cards. An RV 2 hours past limit, a shed painted an unapproved shade, a porch light that offended someone's eyelids. Anthony noticed the pattern. The tone was sterile, the stakes escalated, and the message was rehearsed. If we say it's a rule, and if you push, we push back harder. In the parking lot, Paula found him. You're Ridley, right? The fence guy? He nodded. They'll run you down until you give up or move out. Marjorie doesn't care who you are. She cares about winning. Why does she keep winning? He asked. Paula's answer landed like a hammer. Because most folks don't want trouble. She makes trouble feel expensive. That sentence followed him home and wouldn't sit down. He realized the HOA wasn't just a board, it was a culture built on controlled fear, where letters did the hitting and fines did the bleeding. So he did something they didn't expect. He requested mediation. Not a shouting match, just a table, paper, and daylight. He walked in with photos of his herd, maps of the property, every email and voicemail threaded in chronological order like ammo in a belt. The mediator smiled like a dentist. The HOA will waive some fines if you replace your fence within 60 days. Anthony didn't flinch. That's not a compromise. That's your demand with a coupon. Marjorie cut in, voice smooth enough to pour. We're being generous, Mr. Ridley. He leaned forward. My cattle are behind a locked gate you installed. This isn't decor. This is livelihood. The mediator cleared his throat. Let's focus on practical options. Anthony delivered the only practical option that mattered. Open my road. Stop pretending you're doing me a favor. The meeting ended with that bureaucratic non-answer people join boards to master. We'll be in touch. That night, he sat on the porch long after the sky turned black and the pasture turned into a rumor. The wind carried the restless sound of cattle pacing a fence line, and every step told the truth. This wasn't about a fence anymore. It was about control. He slept light and woke angry, then put the anger where it belonged into work. At dawn, fixing a trough pump, he noticed his herd clustered at the far edge, eyes locked on the creek. The new perimeter didn't just block the road, it blocked water. The only reliable source on that side was now a dead view through steel. He rattled the lock until the sound bounced off the dirt like a dare, then called the HOA office. "I need access to the creek now. Animal welfare isn't optional." The receptionist answered with a tone made of glass. "The HOA believes you have other water points." "Backup tanks," he snapped. "They won't last a week in heat. Do you want dead cattle on your desk?" "I can forward your concern to the board," she said, not seeing him, not hearing them. There's a point in every fight where you stop waiting for permission. That afternoon, he drove to Marjorie's perfect house fresh paint, hedges cut like geometry, not a leaf with the courage to be out of place. She opened the door, polite mask in place. "Mr. Ridley." He kept his voice level. "This isn't about fines anymore. You've cut my animals off from water." Her reply was rehearsed and proud of itself. "We operate under a uniform standard. Exceptions undermine the integrity of the community." He almost laughed. "You're talking about integrity. I'm talking about living creatures depending on me to keep them alive." Her eyes didn't move. "The rules are the rules." He stepped back and let his hands find his sides before they found trouble. This isn't over. Curtains stirred behind her. Neighbors watched like it was theater. "Congratulations, HOA, you just made it public. Stress doesn't arrive with a drum roll, it leaks." 2 days later, the herd's behavior changed. A few stood at the fence and bellowed toward the creek, like calling for a door to open itself. Anthony hauled in extra tanks. Hauling water is a full-body argument with gravity, and gravity always shows up. Glenn helped, leaning on the truck between refills. "She's playing hardball, wear you out until you sign." Anthony tightened a valve. "She's not getting what she wants. I'll haul water till the tires fall off, but I'm not rebuilding my life to match her brochure." The letters kept coming anyway. One envelope even included a drive-by photo of a tank slightly tilted with a claim it was a safety hazard. Glenn read it and snorted. "That's harassment." Anthony folded the paper neatly and slid it back into the stack. "No, that's Marjorie." Then the ground shifted under their feet quietly. A for sale sign appeared on the half-acre strip holding the locked gate. The parcel wasn't tied to his ranch or the HOA's main holdings. It was a sliver with power. If he owned the strip, he owned the gate. If he owned the gate, the lock answered to him. But strategy beats impulse. He didn't sprint to the broker waving cash. He drove to Abilene and sat with Tom Beard, a local attorney whose office smelled like old paper and fresh coffee, the scent of plans that actually happen. Anthony spread letters, maps, photos across the desk and asked 2 clean questions. Is this legal? And if I buy that strip, do I own the gate outright? Tom read like a man who knows how small details turn into avalanches. Bad news first. They're working inside covenants you signed. Those documents give the HOA more control than most realize. Good news. If that parcel is truly separate and includes the only access, then yes, owning it means controlling the gate. Tom didn't sugarcoat the next part. You'll need to verify title, easements, and whether the HOA can claim an implied right-of-way, and you'll need to keep your name out of it, or they'll move heaven and zoning to block you. Anthony nodded. Meaning, Marjorie can't know it's me. Tom's smile held a veteran's respect. Exactly. You make this quiet, and you make it fast. For the next few days, Anthony lived 2 lives. Daylight, feed, mend, haul, wave. Night, blueprint, the move. He called Brett Lawson, an old college friend who ran a property management company 2 counties over, competent, discreet, allergic to drama. Brett agreed to set up an LLC under his umbrella with Anthony as the ghost owner. Clean paperwork, clean money trail, 0 Ridley on the surface. When Glenn swung by and saw the county plat map spread across the table, he grinned. "You're cooking." Anthony didn't pretend otherwise. "If I tell you, you swear it stays here." Glenn raised a hand. "On my boots." Meanwhile, instinct told Marjorie something in the air had changed temperature. She started appearing near the fence with 2 board members, like birds that travel in threes to look important. Clipboards in hand, whispers at the gate, glances that tried to measure him. One afternoon, she strutted over while he repaired a post. "Mr. Ridley, we've scheduled another compliance inspection next week." He didn't look up. "Schedule a parade if you like. The fence stays." She clucked her tongue. "You're making this harder on yourself," he straightened, "and you're underestimating me." They held eye contact long enough for the moment to choose a winner. Then she walked back to her spotless SUV. The next morning, Brett called. Seller accepted the LLC's offer, no counter. Closing set just under 3 weeks. A win, but Tom's warning hummed low. "It isn't yours until the ink is dry." Keep her blind. Keep her guessing. Smile like you're losing. Anthony doubled down on normal. He answered letters with receipts and statutes. Never heat. He logged every water haul, every calf check, every minute spent mitigating the mess they'd made. He documented the creek block with time-stamped photos and sent a formal notice. HOA action has interrupted access to primary water source impacting animal welfare. He CC'd the county animal control officer and the state ag extension. Not a threat, a record. Bullies hate paper that stands up straight. Meanwhile, he knocked on doors of neighbors who looked exhausted by fear. He listened more than he talked. Paula told him Marjorie had a history of breaking people down with 1,000 paper cuts. But everyone's one push away from done, Paula said. "Show them the door and they'll walk." Anthony didn't recruit, he informed. Information breaks spells. Week 2, the HOA tried a new angle. A friendly reminder from legal counsel suggested his tanks violated a clause about temporary structures visible from common thoroughfares. He replied with photos of approved decorative fountains and a single line. "If water storage is offensive, perhaps you can explain the sanctioned water displays at lots 18, 22, 37? The hypocrisy hung in the air like smoke. Only the guilty pretend not to smell. Marjorie pivoted. An inspection crew arrived early, took pictures of nothing, and left a checklist that read like a scavenger hunt. Anthony signed the form received under protest, then posted a calm update in a neighborhood forum, seeking practical solutions for working land and HOA rules. Open to real conversation, comments exploded, not with rage, but with stories. Once a community finds its voice, the script changes. Behind the scenes, title work on the strip moved fast because Brett greased every wheel with perfect paperwork. The parcel, it turned out, predated the HOA's formation and had never been folded into common ownership. No easements recorded, no implied rights recognized by prior owners, a sliver with teeth. Brett kept the seller comfortable and the agents unaware. Tom reviewed the deed language like it had fangs, then nodded. It's clean, close, quiet. Anthony slept for the first time in weeks and woke before dawn anyway, out of habit more than fear. He walked the fence with a thermos and counted heads, the way ranchers pray. The herd calmed a notch when he topped off tanks. Not a solution, just time bought with diesel and stubbornness. Marjorie sensed momentum slipping and tried theater. She staged an open community forum about upholding neighborhood standards, stacking the room with friendly faces, then turned the mic to a presentation of before and after photos of violations corrected by firm leadership. Anthony sat near the back and waited. When the Q&A opened, he stood and asked 3 simple questions. What is the emergency process for animal welfare conflicts? What's the objective measure for visual inconsistency? And how does the board prevent conflicts of interest when board members benefit from fines? The room moved. People turned. Even loyalists prefer answers to slogans. Marjorie mashed the "we'll take that" under advisement button. Paula caught Anthony at the door with a whisper that sounded like a vow. Whatever you're doing, keep going. Closing day finally arrived, like the quiet click before a safe opens. Brett signed for the LLC. Tom verified every line twice. Money moved. Deed recorded. No balloons, no champagne. Just a small stack of paper that turned a weapon aimed at Anthony into a tool in his hands. He drove to the strip with a certified copy and a locksmith who didn't ask questions he didn't need answered. The old lock came off. A new one slid on like it belonged there, because it did. Anthony took a photo of the gate, time-stamped with the deed copy in frame, then walked back to his truck and breathed a breath he'd been holding for months. Power is quiet when you finally hold it. He didn't run to social media. He didn't tack the deed to the clubhouse door. He wrote the HOA, a letter that would age well in court. As of Ridley Holdings LLC is the legal owner of parcel number, including the access gate at location. Effective immediately, any trespass, tampering, or interference with the gate or roadway constitutes unlawful entry and will be addressed by law enforcement. Water access for livestock via the creek will resume under the owner's control, with full liability assumed by Ridley Holdings LLC. He seed the sheriff and the county recorder's office, then drove the road slow, like introducing a friend to their own home. Marjorie called within an hour, voice clipped to the edge. "We were not notified." Anthony kept his tone soft. "You were now." She pivoted to threat. "The board will review and respond." He pivoted to law. "Do so in writing." And Marjorie, "Don't touch the gate." Silence stretched, then snapped. She hung up. 10 minutes later, 2 board members stood at the fence with arms crossed, staring at a lock that didn't answer to them. A few neighbors gathered, not gossip this time, curiosity. Paula stood with them, arms folded, chin lifted. Glenn rolled up in his truck and parked sideways like punctuation. No one yelled. No one needed to. The board left without a word, which was new. Over the next week, the letters changed tone from imperial to uncertain. Council requested clarification regarding access rights. Anthony replied with the deed and a gentle reminder that animal welfare exemptions under state law supersede cosmetic bylaws, citing statute numbers like fence posts in a straight line. He offered mediation again, this time on neutral ground with a retired judge. He wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. He was building a bridge with weight ratings posted and guardrails bright. Meanwhile, he kept hauling water out of habit, even though the creek now flowed free. The herd settled. The bellowing stopped. The pasture sound shifted back to the ordinary music of animals eating, which is peace if you know what you're hearing. The culture began to crack. People who had paid fines they couldn't afford started asking for policy reviews. A family with the too bright porch light filed an appeal and won. An RV owner got a variance that should have existed all along. The board quietly updated language about visual inconsistency to include measurable criteria. Marjorie lost her favorite tool, vagueness. When you replace vibe with rules, power has to behave. She tried one last play, accusing Anthony of circumventing community norms. He answered with the sentence that ends that argument every time: "I followed the law." The room was tired of drama. The room clapped. If you're watching this and you've ever been cornered by a petty tyrant with a rulebook, here's the blueprint Anthony proved works. Document everything. Ask clean questions in public. Refuse to be baited. Build allies quietly. Find the lever. The bully forgot to chain down, then buy the lever. Don't grandstand, serve notice. When they spin the story, keep showing the receipts. If you're still here, drop steady in the comments so I know you're one of the stubborn ones, because that's what it takes, not rage, not speeches. Steady? By month's end, the mail looked normal again. Bills, catalogs, a postcard from Brett with a doodle of a padlock wearing a cowboy hat. Anthony stood by the gate at sunset, the creek throwing back gold like it had been waiting to be useful. He wasn't a hero, he was a rancher who refused to be redesigned by people who never shoveled a trough in August. Glenn handed him a coffee and nodded at the horizon. "You didn't beat them by shouting." Anthony nodded back. "No, by not moving." They listened to the fence settle as the heat left the metal. That's the sound of a fight ending right. A week later, Paula planted a new sapling where her old tree once stood. Neighbors came by with shovels and water jugs like a barn raising in slow motion. Marjorie drove past and didn't stop. No one needed her permission. The HOA board posted a bland update about enhanced transparency and community partnership. Fine, call it whatever helps you sleep. Anthony called Tom and asked him to draft a simple easement from the LLC to his own ranch so the road would never be hostage again. Belt and suspenders, quiet moves, permanent fixes. Here's the last truth, and it's the one bullies can't stand. Control collapses when people stop borrowing fear. Anthony didn't out-argue the board, he outlasted their script. He didn't burn the house down, he bought the door. He didn't turn the neighborhood into a battlefield, he turned it into a place where rules have to mean something and lives matter more than aesthetics. If this story gave you a spine tingle, share it with the one friend who's one letter away from giving up. And tell me in one word what you're taking back this week. Gate, road, breath, sleep, mine, access. Because that's all we ever fight for in the end. Access to our work, our water, our lives, without asking permission from people who've never held a bucket. Secrets in small towns leak faster than diesel on hot gravel. 2 days after Brett's call, Anthony parked down the road and watched the little parcel with the gate like it was a sleeping snake. Wind bent the corner of the for sale sign, otherwise nothing moved. The lot was barely a postage stamp gate, thin gravel tongue, a stubborn line of mesquite, but it choked everything beyond it. Whoever held that strip held every truck, every delivery, every boot step onto his land. The HOA would have swallowed it already if money or law were on their side. They hadn't, which meant there was a gap, a clean, legal gap big enough for a man to walk through without asking permission. When Brett rang again, "Title search is clean, no liens, seller wants a fast exit." Anthony smiled at the road dust. "Good, let's keep them asleep." He lived like a decoy for the next week. No sudden trips to town, no extra coffees with chatty neighbors. When asked about the fence, he shrugged. "We'll see how it plays." Inside, he pictured the sound a lock makes when it gives sharp, final, like a door closing on a bully's hand. Glenn showed up with a cooler and that grin that always meant trouble. "You've been quiet. That's either good or dangerous." Anthony passed him a beer. "Let's say I'm lining things up so I never need permission again." Glenn laughed. "There he is." Twice, Marjorie cruised past, serving her curt wave like a traffic citation. Anthony's face stayed neutral, but his pulse clicked faster. Paula found him near the cereal aisle and dropped her voice. "Bored sniffing around that gate lot. I heard, surveyor." Anthony's answer was calm. "Appreciate the heads up." His next call to Brett wasn't calm. "We move now." The days between intent and action are always the loudest. Every tire crunch on gravel had Anthony glancing toward the road. Every text ping felt like a hand on the gate. Brett kicked the title team into fourth gear. "We can open escrow by Friday." Anthony worked like normal, feed, fix, haul, while his mind rehearsed counters to every stunt Marjorie might pull. Friday morning, the phone broke the tension. "It's done," Brett said. "Escrow's open, deposit posted. Train's moving unless you jump." Anthony exhaled a month of tight breath. No one's jumping. That night, he didn't celebrate. He made a list. If he owned the gate, the HOA would swing hard, sheriff, lawsuits, emergency amendments, a PR blitz. Fine. Winning the piece of metal meant nothing if he wasn't ready for the fallout. He prepared for both. Closing landed on a gray Tuesday that threatened rain and delivered none. Anthony dressed like any other day, worn jeans, dusted boots, button up with a stubborn crease, and parked behind the title office like a man who knew cameras might be watching. Inside, Brett grinned over a stack of paper thick enough to wheelbarrow. "Ready to make her day difficult? Let's make mine easier," Anthony said. The process was clean. The LLC took the ink, not Anthony's name. Brett signed, funds moved, and an hour later a heavy silver ring sat in the middle of the table. He lifted the biggest key. It weighed more than metal, it weighed like leverage. He didn't strut, he didn't pose, He just pocketed the future and walked out the back. They drove home separate. At the ranch, Anthony parked short and walked the last 50 yards. The gate looked ordinary in that way. New power pretends to be boring. He slid the key into the padlock. It turned smooth, a click like a verdict, and the shackle popped. He swung the gate wide and stood aside. In the nearest pasture, cattle lifted their heads, sniffed the air, and drifted toward the sound of water like church bells. The creek glittered like it had been waiting for someone brave enough to insist it still mattered. Control came back to him in the simplest way. Open, close, his choice. He shut the gate gently, relocked it with his lock, and wrote the time and photo proof into a folder already tabbed for court. Then he went inside and made coffee that didn't taste like paperwork. Control lasted exactly 48 hours. On morning 3, a white SUV rolled up like a warning label. Marjorie stepped out, heels ticking on gravel, clipboard under arm, 2 board members forming the chorus. "Mr. Ridley," she said, voice cool, "you appear to have accessed HOA property without authorization." Anthony leaned on the metal, comfortable. "This isn't HOA property. I own this lot. County records will sing the same song." Her eyes narrowed. "Impossible. The association had first right of refusal." "Maybe," he said, "but you didn't use it. Seller took my offer. I've got the deed." A board member swallowed. "Marjorie? If that's." She sliced him off with a look. "We'll see about that." "Challenge what you like," Anthony said. "But this access doesn't answer to you anymore. It answers to me." They left without a parting shot, but the air hummed. By afternoon, 3 emails arrived from the HOA demanding clarification. Anthony forwarded each to Tom. The reply was a scalpel. Let them move first. Word moved faster than trucks. At the feed store, strangers offered quiet congrats. On the road, some waved like allies, others like jurors. Glenn found him on the porch, boots up, coffee in hand. "Looks like you lit a fire." Anthony didn't smile big, just enough. Good. Maybe this place stops being afraid of her, but buying the gate wasn't the end. It was the starter pistol. 2 days later, a certified letter landed like a staged punch. Your ownership may constitute an encroachment on association rights. Cease alterations pending legal review. Glenn read it and barked a laugh. "If they had a claim, you'd already be in court." Anthony nodded. Bluff or not, they're not backing down. Saturday turned the heat up. Anthony rolled a feed load toward the gate and found Marjorie there with 2 sheriff's deputies, blue-gold decals flashing judgment. He killed the engine and stepped out with paperwork ready. "Deputies, this parcel, this gate, owned by my LLC, deed recorded." Marjorie folded her arms. "That property has always been under HOA management. He's interfering with community access." Anthony handed the deed to the closer deputy. He traced lines with his finger, nodded slow, and handed it back. "It checks. He owns it." Marjorie's jaw tightened like wire. "We'll take this to court." The deputy tipped his hat. "You're right, ma'am, but no laws being broken here." They left, but not before neighbors gathered in the slow, magnetic way small towns do. Support murmured. So did criticism. Division wasn't creeping anymore. It was obvious. Paula texted that night, "Be careful. Emergency board meeting Monday. They're pushing a new rule." Anthony showed up early to a room humming like a hornet nest. Marjorie didn't waste a second. Recent events highlight gaps in our capacity to maintain standards. The board proposes an amendment granting authority over any access points serving more than one property. Anthony raised a hand. "Convenient, considering you're aiming at one owner." "This isn't about you," she said, eyes locked on him. "It's about the community." He walked her through the overreach. The board claims power over land it doesn't own, calls it security, and hopes no one reads the fine print. When the board vote came, it split 3-2, but the amendment needed homeowner approval. Translation, she'd have to convince the people she'd been steamrolling. Afterward, neighbors approached like rain after dust. Frank Delgado, wiry and direct. "You're not the first she tried to flatten. Might be the first who can beat her. Keep going." By midweek, the fight burst onto local social. A community page lit up with gate memes and policy debates. Anthony posted only facts, time-stamped records, public filings, statutes. In the comments, sides formed like storm lines. Then a plain envelope showed up via Glenn. "Check the county clerk filings tomorrow." Anthony did. His stomach dropped. Marjorie had filed notice of intent to purchase a narrow county-owned strip along his fence. If she snagged it, she'd cut an alternate route and bleed his leverage. Clever. Predictable. Not fatal. He drove straight to Tom. The lawyer read the notice under morning light and nodded. "Smart move. Not simple. It's county-owned, earmarked for possible utilities. She'll need hearings, approvals, a mayor who likes her, and a miracle. We'll slow it, file objections, demand transparent process, lobby to keep it public. It won't be fast. Do it," Anthony said, "whatever it costs." Outside courtrooms, the story got louder. The local paper splashed a photo Anthony leaning on his gate, arms crossed, creek shining behind him. Headlines stayed neutral. The image did the talking. At the feed store, men he'd never met shook his hand. At the grocery, an HOA volunteer hissed, "You're making this harder for everyone." He let it slide. Some people confuse peace with compliance. Talk radio picked it up and turned his private war into an hour of property rights versus order at all costs. Callers argued like holidays at a bad Thanksgiving. Then came the community barbecue, normally brisket, sweet tea, and gossip. This year, a rally with paper plates. Glenn had quietly printed Ridley's right pins because, of course, he had. Anthony tried to orbit the edges, but orbits decay. Marjorie approached with 2 board members, and a smile stretched too tight. "Enjoying the event?" "Not as much as I'd enjoy my time back," he said evenly. "You've made your point," she purred. "The HOA will continue enforcing rules. Consider the long-term consequences of this publicity." He met her eyes. "You've used fear for years. That ends now." People fell quiet. Marjorie pivoted to stagecraft. "We can still settle this privately." "You had that chance," he said. "You chose the lock." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That night, Paula called. "She's furious. She's lost the narrative. People are speaking up." "Good," Anthony said. Maybe that's the real win, but he knew better than to mistake momentum for victory. 2 days later, Tom called. "She filed suit claims, procedural irregularities in your purchase." Anthony didn't feel fear, he felt a clean line harden. The summons arrived Friday, a thick packet with enough Latin to choke a dictionary, easements, covenants, undue influence. Under the jargon, a last-ditch grab. Tom flipped pages the next morning and snorted. Nothing solid, sales clean, titles clear, they're trying to exhaust you into settling. Anthony shook his head, not settling. Weeks turned into hearings, courtrooms filled with curious locals, neighbors who'd found their courage, and HOA loyalists who sat arms crossed like they were trying to hold the tide. Marjorie arrived early, immaculate as a catalog, flanked by bored allies who'd stopped smiling with their eyes. She never acknowledged Anthony. During a hallway break, Paula squeezed his arm. "Win or lose, you changed the place. People are asking why, not just paying." Anthony appreciated it, but he wasn't there for moral points. He wanted a judgment that couldn't be spun. He wanted the gavel, not a headline. It came on a bright Tuesday that smelled like cut grass and new starts. The judge read the decision without drama. Purchase valid. Title stands. HOA has no authority over the lot or gate. Defendant's fees paid by the plaintiff. The gavel tapped. A low murmur rolled through the room like satisfaction, trying not to whoop. Glenn shot a thumbs up from row 2. Paula beamed through tears she would deny later. A few quiet folks who'd been bruised by fines shook Anthony's hand like they were shaking their own. Cameras waited outside. Anthony kept it simple. This was never about offense. It's about not letting people take what's yours because they think they can. If this helps one neighbor anywhere fight fair, good. He drove straight to the gate. The cattle grazed lazily by the creek, water winking in sunlight like it was in on the joke. Anthony leaned against the post and let the breeze pull the last of the tension out of his shoulders. Glenn rolled up with 2 cold beers, sat, and passed one over. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "It's more than good," Anthony said. "It's proof." They talked shade and herd and weather because normal is a luxury you earn. Anthony knew the HOA wouldn't evaporate and Marjorie wouldn't retire from being Marjorie, but she'd learned that intimidation has a ceiling, and he'd learned that persistence, stapled to truth, cracks ceilings. Time did what time does. It made space for change. HOA meetings sounded different. Board members measured words instead of weaponizing them. Neighbors raised hands without scanning the room for permission. The phrase visual inconsistency found measurable criteria, which is to say, it found a leash. Paula planted a new sapling where her old tree had been murdered by paperwork. Neighbors arrived with shovels and jokes, and no one asked Marjorie for a blessing. The board posted a bland notice about transparency and partnership, which is bully code for "we lost." Anthony called Tom and filed a belt, and suspenders move a recorded easement from the LLC to his ranch, so no future. Board could hold the road hostage again. Quiet moves, permanent fixes. Marjorie tried one more angle, a petition to restore order and protect access. Heavy on adjectives, light on law. It fizzled. Fear doesn't travel far once people smell its tricks. Anthony kept hauling water some mornings, even though the creek ran clear habit. Stewardship, faith, that work beats theater. He trained 3 teenagers from up the road to check tanks and mend small breaks for a day rate that taught value both ways. He waved to the deputies when they passed. They waved back like men grateful a hot spot had cooled. He sent the locksmith a thank you pie because country manners should never be casualties of war. If you're still with me, here's the straight blueprint you can steal. Document like a man building a bridge. Dates, photos, calls, receipts. Ask clean questions in public so silence becomes an answer. Refuse bait. Build allies quietly. Find the lever everyone assumes is bolted down and buy it. Don't crow, serve notice. When they push narrative, show records. When they swarm, breathe. When you win, make the win bigger than you. If this helped, drop unlocked in the comments so someone who needs it tonight sees they're not crazy for fighting. Months later, the mail looked human again. Bills. Seed catalogs with sunbursts on the cover. A postcard from Brett drawing a padlock with a cowboy hat and the caption, "Nice gate." Anthony laughed, then took the long way to the fence. He rested a hand on warm metal and listened to the sound that had been missing for too long, the ordinary hush of a place doing what it was built to do. Glenn joined him, eyes on the water. "You didn't beat them by shouting." "No," Anthony said, "by standing." They let silence say the rest. And if you've got your own locked gate, literal or otherwise, remember this. The moment you stop letting someone else write the rules for your life, you begin to live it. Don't assume their policy is your fate. Ask why, push back, organize, and when the time comes, put your key in the lock you paid for and turn it without apology. Subscribe for more real stories that put power back where it belongs. In your hands, on your land, in your life. Your voice matters. Your rights matter. No one fences you in unless you hand them the posts.